In today's episode, we'll be talking about the new HBO Max documentary, Class Action Park. Spoilers beware. So, Class Action Park is a documentary about the most dangerous amusement park in the world, so they say, also known as Accident Park. It was opened from 1978 to 1996 in Vernon, New Jersey, and it killed 5 people in the 80s and injured countless. So, what was your first initial reaction of watching this?
Wow, I wasn't expecting. I
Yeah,
went there, and for the first 10 minutes, I wasn't expecting a lot because I wasn't hooked on. But after the 10-minute mark, when they actually started to talk about what happened at this park, I was like, oh my gosh.
yeah. It was insane. I had watched the trailer before I watched the documentary, and I was hooked by the trailer. So I was excited to watch the documentary. But my initial reaction was ew, actually disgusting,
Mhm.
beyond disgusting.
The
The amount
first
of
thing
the
that
amount
they
of illegal stuff that was going on there is
yeah.
um
And also, just to add on, one of the first things that they started out this whole thing with was basically talking about the Cannonball Loop,
yeah,
which they were so graphic. They're like people came out of that slide with lacerations, with bloody mouths, missing teeth. It's
yeah.
like, oh my god.
Yeah, the Cannonball Loop is it's a 360 loop. So it's a water slide that went down and then up around. So
And then straight
the
out,
water had to give you enough momentum to get all the way around, which it didn't,
it
because
didn't. Yeah.
would go up in the water slide, and then they would hit the other side of the water slide on the way down. And the first couple tries, they would have their teeth knocked out and be bloody and have lacerations, like you said. And then they fixed it a little bit, and then kids were still coming out with lacerations, and they didn't know why. And then they looked into the trap door, and there were teeth embedded
That,
in the slide,
yeah.
and so kids were hitting those teeth that were
And
knocked
they were
out.
getting cut.
That's
And it
disgusting, first of all.
That's really disgusting. And I mean, the one interesting thing is how they animated the whole thing. That whole thing was basically all on
Yeah.
and on animation, so there was no live footage of the actual thing. It was
Yeah,
all
I mean, I doubt they could have
so
gotten live footage. That was completely
that
illegal.
was disgusting. But
Yeah.
I mean, at least we got some view of it with the animation. But still, and the thing was that when people would leave that slide, they would drop down into ice cold water.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even warm water, it was cold water. It was
Yeah.
even worse.
I know. And what's his name? Owner's name is uh
Gene.
Eugene Mulvihill, and he
Mm-hmm.
would pay $100 for the
Every
employees to test it.
yeah.
And before that, they were just testing dummies, and they would come out. What they would come out
Mutilated. The dummies would be missing heads, be missing
right.
limbs. It was
That's first of all, that's insane. Second of all, I don't even know. It's illegal.
yeah.
But what the documentary it really unfolded it went on from ride to ride. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it started with the water world. What are some of the other slides in the water world? The diving cliffs. Did you
Oh,
what
what's it
the
called?
that ride, the diving cliffs? You would just jump off 20 feet above. There was no height limit. There was no weight limit, and there
Mhm.
were lifeguards. They just watched them jump on top of each other from 20
Yeah,
feet above.
it was insane. And there was also the Tarzan Slide, the
Oh yeah,
Tarzan swing, which
yeah,
was basically a swing that people would go on. I mean, they would grab onto some sort of rope and they would swing and they would let themselves drop into the water. But
yeah.
the only catch was that the water was freezing, so people would get shocked
And then they
and
forgot how to swim.
they forgot how to swim. And so and on top of that, a lot of people, they do flips and they do other things, and they would dislocate their shoulders.
Yeah, and there one of the comedians in the documentary, I forget his name, but he was um we would go off the Tarzan slide, and 150 people would be watching that one person going off the Tarzan thing, And if you couldn't swim, everyone just like degraded you and just called you names and said, "Oh, you can't swim, like leave, you suck, blah blah blah." And some like people would flash each other on the way down.
Oh my god,
I was like,
that was insane. And yeah, oh my gosh. And
what?
also that was like insane. But I think that was like one of the things that people were there for. That was
Yeah.
this was all like something that was out of like a movie, and they kind of made it come to life, but
Yeah.
it's not safe.
Yeah, it's something like you would see in a movie like Project X or something. It was
Oh,
just free for all. It was a free for all. One of the former lifeguards was like, it was as if like if someone could think up an amusement park completely run by kids, this was Action Park.
yeah.
And that's what it was
Kids
like.
and no rules.
Yeah. It was all kids, no rules. It was kids 14 to 17 running the park completely.
Yeah.
There were a couple of supervisors, but it was all the it was the lifeguards who were implementing the rules, which there were none because they didn't implement any.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the other things that was there in the water park zone was
Mhm.
that there was the wave pool, and they got into
Oh,
that.
right.
But yeah,
I remember I used to go in like
it
when I
was
used to go to water parks. I remember the wave pool, and that was like the best part. But
yeah.
the things they
The
said
wave-
about this wave pool, they called it the grave pool. 2 people
Mhm.
died.
Mhm.
Um, you were someone said in the documentary, I have a quote, you were expected to drown
Oh
at
yeah.
the Action Park wave pool.
You expect, like, if you went in there, and they called the place that, like, if you go in there and the water's past your shoulder,
Mhm.
then they're like, they saw people like dying from that, like
Yeah.
you would be sucked in and you would die, and they
You
said
would
that.
save like 3 to 4 people within
Oh
the hour.
yeah, and he said one of the people there said that he saw whole families of 12 or 15 dragging each other down.
Because they couldn't swim. Because
Yeah.
I think they explained it really well in the documentary. A wave pool is completely different from the waves in the ocean because like there's salt and there's buoyancy. So when you're in the ocean, when the wave goes up, you go up with it. But in the wave pool, in a pool, you got to swim up with the wave to
Yeah.
catch it. And the disgusting thing about the wave pool, in my opinion, was the lifeguards, they had to clear it out every so often to check if they missed any bodies.
Oh yeah.
If they
No, they
missed,
had to stop the pool, but yeah, to stop
yeah,
it.
because they couldn't see to the bottom of the pool because there was human waste, pus from injuries, and mud that they dragged in. I don't know who would go in that, but
I know. I think this was one of those things that teens are like, let's do it. It sounds crazy. It sounds risky. Let's go and like risk our lives. And so they
yeah,
did. But I think one of the main things that stuck with me for the wave pool was the fact that any lifeguard that was put there, like they mentioned, like you were kind of like punished. Like if you were put there, you're kind of like punished for something because
that's how they would haze the new guards.
they would use new guards like that because they would put you on the death chair. Like the death chair would
Yeah,
be closest to like the death zone of the wave pool,
yeah,
and every so often they'd have to stop, and as you said, they'd have to check the floor. But and the sooner I think they painted the floor white because
yeah,
people
yeah. You know,
leave.
I was a lifeguard for 5 years, and I was watching the documentary and looking at that wave pool. Like where I worked, there would have been easily 15 guards all watching that one pool. There
Yeah,
was one guard watching the whole pool. At max, maybe 2, and that just it was crazy.
I know.
Um, well, one of the other rides I thought was pretty crazy. The kayak experience.
Oh gosh, I
Where
have think
one poor kid was in a kayak and there were fans that pushed the water so the boats would move, and it short circuited and the guy was electrocuted to death.
yeah. And honestly, it's insane. Like one person who was giving the interview said it in a really good way. He said something along the lines of like, if one person dies, close it off. Like,
Yeah.
but more than
Most
one
guys,
person.
that's enough.
Yeah, that's enough. And they kept the wave pool open. They kept so many things open
I
after
know.
people kept on dying. It's like,
Yeah, I think the guy said The guy said after the first person died at Action Park, and then he said you really got to feel for the second guy, because if one person dies, that ride should be closed. But if the second guy dies at that same ride, that's just embarrassing, you know?
That's embarrassing and that's horrifying. Like, how can you let the same mistake happen twice? But here they did. Yeah. So I think now would be like a good time to mention that this this park, they called it Class Action Park. Well, the lawyers did actually, but it was split up into 3 main sections: the Alpine section of the Alpine Slide, the water worlds, which we just talked about, with all the water slides, and the last thing was Motor World, which was consisted of go-karts and exhaust spewing engines. And smack in the middle of Water World and of Motor World was Highway 95.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
And next to there was a place where adults would go to drink.
Yeah.
And then they would go on these rides and get terribly hurt. The Alpine Slide, I think they said that was the most like injury prone ride. The Alpine Slide was it was made of like concrete and fiberglass, and you would go down with a cart that was barely even working. The only control on the cart was a brake. So you had to know the right spaces to brake at so you wouldn't fly off, because the slide was really only like it wasn't high enough that it would keep you on the slide. So if you didn't brake at the right time, you would fly off. And a lot of people did, and they would have huge bumps, like burn marks. And one guy, George, I think his name was George Larson. He flew off the slide and he smacked his head into rocks, which there were rocks everywhere. No one removed them, and he was in a coma for 7 days until he died.
Yeah, and just adding on to like George Larson, he was like the first person who died in this park.
Yes, he was the first person.
Yeah, and like during this whole thing, like when I heard his mom talk about his brother talk about it, it was so like horrifying. Like this is the sort of thing that can actually happen. And wow, you know, how do people do this? Because if you watch the clips of this, what you're gonna see is that this whole park looks like if a kid made it. It looks like
it does. It really does.
It looks like a kid's dream, honestly, and it came to life. And
the mother of the kid who passed was talked a lot about the owner, and like a lot of other people in the interview did, and they all said that he was crazy and he had no soul. He had
no soul, and he didn't believe in laws. He was like, oh my gosh.
Before he even bought the water park, he was on Wall Street, where he was like he was fired from like fraud or something like that, and then he went on to this water park where he committed, I think, insurance fraud. I don't know how he was never
found out.
He got out of every lawsuit that came his way.
He made a fake insurance company to cover this part.
Insurance.
Like, you would think like they get sued all the time, and I mean they probably did. But the one thing that Gene did was that he kept on taking every single lawsuit, and he kept on stretching the whole thing out. He would take it to trial. He'd do everything with it, and then he basically wouldn't ever settle. And so lawyers would just...
And he would exhaust them. He would just exhaust the people until they just gave up and gave him what he wanted, which is, it really says something about the justice system. Honestly, nothing ever went like that. He was put in jail.
Yeah, and the few times that like the U.S. Marshals came to get their money from him, like it was just like it was like I think a few times, but other than that, he would drag this out.
Yeah, it was all negligence. Another problem with the park was he oversaw everything, didn't do anything about it, and the lifeguards who basically they called Gene Uncle Gene. That's weird. That freaks me out. That like creeps me out in itself.
Yeah,
but
I know.
They would they had to take like things into their own hands, and they're 17 years old. They're 14 to 17. They don't know what they're doing. They would write on wristbands CFS, which means can't effing swim. That's just unprofessional, first of all. Okay, see it like that's just, and you got that because you either were already saved, or I don't know what the other reason was, but you just couldn't swim. And
Yeah.
instead of not allowing them to jump off, they just put that wristband on them.
It's like, let them, like, stop making them go on this ride. Like, it's so absurd. Like, thinking about it now, it's just so absurd. Like, such a thing would even exist. But a lot of time in this HBO doc was spent, or like a decent amount of time was spent talking about how the time was back in like the 80s.
Right.
So a lot of, like, just a bit of background, I guess, like for a bunch of people watching, that would be that in the 80s, like, you had like spirit of like nothing can go wrong, and the parents weren't even watching their kids, so the kids would go out, they'd play until 8, until 9, until whenever, and then they'd come back, and so the parents weren't watching, and
There
the
were no
kids,
cell phones or anything to
yeah,
track your
no
kids.
phones, nothing. And basically it was just a kid's world. Like, you'd go, you'd play, you'd come back.
Yeah, I think that was my main takeaway from the documentary. Like we all watch this now in 2020,
Yeah.
and like we say how is this even allowed, and we're repulsed. And everyone in the documentary says the same thing, that the 80s was a different time. It was a time where you wanted to prove to your friends that you were fearless and you could do anything. And going to Action Park and surviving essentially you just wore a badge of pride.
Yeah.
And
One of the biggest things you could do.
yeah,
This was basically like an 80s movies come to life. And one of the things that you just said, that like if you got through it, you would have like one guy mentioned there was this kind of edge of like survivor's respect, that if you got through it, people would like respect you, like, oh, like, cool, that's great. But one of the interesting things that I took away from this is that a lot of people went on this ride. Like, even like if you went there and you saw it, and like half of you were thinking like, okay, I'm not gonna go. It looks really scary. I feel like peer pressure would have done a lot, because a lot of these interviews, they were talking about how their friends would be there, and if you didn't go, like, they would try and one up each other on how hard you could make it. So peer pressure, definitely.
the comedian was talking about something. He was like, the 80s were a time where like you would either like get drunk with your buddies and you would say, oh yeah, I did this and I did that and it was so fun and whatever. But then in your therapy session, you'd be like, how was that allowed? Like, that screwed me up so much. The fact that I had no parental guidance, that just screwed me up. So it was like I feel like the 80s was like kind of best of both worlds. And then, in the end of the documentary, they almost in a sense kind of like glorified Gene.
Yeah, I did. I felt that too. I felt like throughout this whole thing, not even like toward the end, except for that woman who lost her kid and this other woman who was, I'm not sure who. I think it's somebody who said like she didn't like him, but I never saw her like after that. But besides these two people, I felt like a lot of the people there kind of like glorified him, as you just said. Like, they said, they acknowledged that what he did was like bad and all that. But at the same time, you could tell like they had some sort of a weird like, respect for him.
Yes, I think he was like, they would say like, oh yeah, he was crazy. Like, he said these like horrible things, and then like I would just stand there and laugh. But then like he said he did what he said he was gonna do. He said he would build a water park that you could just come and have fun. There's no rules, and that's what it was. And it was Uncle Gene, and I was like, okay.
It's like, yeah, just to go off that, like you mentioned, right? And I think that brought back one of the parts of this talk. So there was this guy in the talk, and he's giving interviews, and pretty sure this guy he was pretty high up. Like, he and Gene would have pretty, they would be pretty close, and they talk a lot about this action park. And so one of the things that he said was that, as you just said, like he was talking to Gene, and Gene mentioned that there was this like ride that people wouldn't go on with tickets. Like he saw a bunch of people getting on that ride without any tickets. So what he said is that I'm gonna hold up the stick, and if
it was like kind of like a taser, but it was a fake taser.
Yeah, exactly. It was this fake taser thing, and so basically he came up with this skit. So he hired he hired one of the employees, and he made them stand on in the line. And so when they came up, they're like, and Gene asked, hey, or I think the person working there asked, hey, do you have a ticket? And that guy was like, no. They would take the stick and they would taser him, and that guy would act like he's dead. And so Gene was saying that's how to send a message to all the other people in that line that, oh, you can't come on this ride without a ticket or you're gonna end up dead.
And they thought he was dead, and they went to the town.
Angry.
Yeah, they went to like the town council or whatever, and it was like, this guy killed someone.
Yeah, parents were calling. They were like, my kid saw a ride instructor person kill a person in the line. Wow.
Horrible. Just horrible. That's just all around morally horrible.
It's morally wrong. First of all, as you said.
What do you think your overall thoughts of the documentary was? What do you give it on a scale from 1 teacup to 5 teacups?
I would honestly give it a 4 teacups. A 4.5 if I could, but a half teacup you can't drink tea out of. So
no, I would agree. I thought it was really good. I thought it was really
good too.
I thought it was really entertaining.
Yeah, I thought it was really good too.
I don't usually like documentaries, but I thought this was really interesting because actually, it's now called Mountain Creek. And I don't think a lot of people know that it used to be an action park, because I've been going to Mountain Creek like my whole life.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that this was like its history.
Wow.
And it freaked me out completely. Because I remember some of the rides, like the Alpine Slide, it's not motorized anymore. It's now a water slide, and you had a mat on it. And I remember going down something like that, and I was like, oh my gosh, was that like a similar ride? I was like, what? But yeah.
And I mean, yeah, like just going off, like there were so many rides out there that had, the bottom line was that you took a risk. Like every single time people would go there, they would either end up, fine, or, with a few battle scars, or they'd end up dead.
Yeah.
And the people with a few battle scars, like the way that they treated them was weird, because you would have you have some sort of an orange liquid that they would spray on you.
Oh yeah.
They said the pain from that was insane. Like they made a circle around people who were getting sprayed, and while they were spraying them, they said that, okay, if you can stay inside this circle while we're spraying you, you're gonna get a gift, which ended up being like a pen.
Yeah. And 2 people in, I think, 2 years had stayed inside the circle because it hurt so bad. They were in just hysterics, either crying or just pacing because they couldn't stand the pain.
Yeah.
The park eventually had to buy ambulances because the town's ambulances couldn't keep up with the amount of people being dragged out of there and into the hospital. The whole thing is just, it's ludicrous.
Yeah, and that's all for today. Join us next time on Targum Tea for more reviews, and make sure to follow the Daily Targum on our Twitter, Insta, Facebook, and YouTube for more content. See you guys later.